In this episode, we begin our first broad look at one of the most important areas in the Certified Information Systems Auditor (CISA) journey, because Domain 2 asks you to understand how organizations direct, oversee, and evaluate information technology (IT) at the leadership level. For a brand new learner, this can feel a little abstract at first, especially if your mind goes straight to firewalls, passwords, or system outages whenever cybersecurity is mentioned. Governance of IT is different, because it is less about typing commands or configuring tools and more about who makes decisions, how priorities are chosen, how risk is watched, and how leaders make sure technology actually supports the business instead of drifting in its own direction. This domain matters because most major technology problems are not caused only by broken software or clever attackers. Very often, they grow out of weak accountability, unclear ownership, poor oversight, conflicting priorities, or decisions that were never connected properly to business goals in the first place. Once you see that clearly, Domain 2 stops feeling like management language and starts feeling like the operating system for how an organization governs its technology future. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A simple way to understand governance of IT is to think of it as the way an organization makes sure technology decisions are guided by business purpose, leadership expectations, and ongoing oversight. Governance answers big questions such as what technology the organization should invest in, what level of risk is acceptable, who is accountable when something goes wrong, and how leaders will know whether the technology function is creating value. That makes governance a business issue before it is a technical issue, because the point is not merely to run systems. The point is to run systems in a way that supports customers, revenue, operations, compliance, trust, and long-term strategy. If a hospital depends on clinical systems, if a bank depends on transaction accuracy, or if an online retailer depends on constant availability, governance helps make sure IT decisions reflect the importance of those outcomes. Without governance, technology efforts can become fragmented, reactive, and overly influenced by short-term pressure, which makes it much harder for leadership to steer the organization with confidence when priorities compete or risks begin to grow. One of the most important ideas in this domain is the difference between governance and management, because new learners often hear the two words used as if they mean the same thing. Governance is mainly about direction, accountability, and oversight. It is concerned with setting expectations, approving priorities, deciding how much risk the organization is willing to accept, and making sure performance is being watched at the right level. Management, by contrast, is about execution. It takes the direction set through governance and turns it into projects, processes, staffing decisions, operations, and daily control activities. A helpful way to remember this is that governance asks what should happen and why it matters, while management focuses on how the work will actually get done. The distinction matters a great deal in auditing because many organizations talk confidently about managing IT while paying far less attention to whether leadership is truly governing it. Strong operations do not remove the need for strong oversight, and efficient teams can still move in the wrong direction if the organization has not defined priorities, accountability, and decision rights clearly enough. As you move deeper into Domain 2, you start to see that governance of IT is really trying to accomplish several connected goals at the same time. One goal is alignment, meaning technology should support the organization's mission, strategy, and business priorities rather than becoming a separate world with its own unrelated agenda. Another goal is value delivery, which means the organization should understand whether its spending and effort on IT are producing useful outcomes instead of simply creating more activity. Governance also cares about risk, because leaders need a clear view of what could disrupt operations, damage trust, create regulatory exposure, or weaken decision-making. Resource use is another major concern, since people, budget, time, data, and infrastructure are all limited and must be directed where they matter most. Finally, governance involves performance monitoring, because leadership needs evidence that technology services, programs, and controls are doing what the organization expects. These goals are connected, not separate, and strong governance helps leadership balance them rather than letting one crowd out all the others. Because governance is about direction and accountability, roles and responsibilities matter enormously. Someone has to decide, someone has to approve, someone has to execute, someone has to monitor, and someone has to escalate when performance or risk begins to move in the wrong direction. In a mature organization, those roles are not left to chance or to informal habit. Boards, senior executives, business leaders, technology leaders, risk leaders, compliance functions, and audit functions each play different parts in the overall governance picture, even though their responsibilities may overlap at certain points. The board or equivalent oversight body usually focuses on strategic direction, major risk exposure, and whether management is governing technology in a way that supports the enterprise. Executive management translates that oversight into decisions about funding, priorities, policies, and accountability. Process owners and technology leaders then carry those decisions into operation. One of the easiest ways governance breaks down is when ownership becomes blurry, because then important issues float between departments, decisions are delayed, and everyone assumes someone else is responsible for asking the hard questions. Governance also relies on formal structure, because leadership cannot govern IT well if expectations exist only as verbal habits or personal assumptions. That is why organizations use policies, standards, charters, committee structures, approval processes, and defined reporting paths to turn governance from an idea into a working system. A policy may say that important system changes require prior approval. A committee may review major technology investments, and a decision framework may define when exceptions must be escalated beyond a local manager. These structures matter because they create consistency and make it easier to see whether decisions are being made in the right place with the right level of scrutiny. At the same time, good governance does not mean drowning the organization in documents or meetings. Structure is useful only when it supports better decisions and clearer accountability. A thick stack of policies can still hide weak governance if leaders do not read them, if employees do not understand them, or if exceptions are granted casually without thoughtful review of business impact and risk. A major theme in this domain is strategic alignment, because one of the clearest signs of strong governance is that IT exists to enable business direction rather than to chase disconnected technical interests. When leadership sets business goals such as geographic growth, better customer service, operational resilience, cost control, or stronger compliance performance, IT investments should be chosen and prioritized with those goals in mind. That sounds obvious, but it is surprisingly easy for organizations to lose that connection. Teams may become attached to certain projects, tools, or upgrades because they are interesting, familiar, or politically favored, even when those efforts do not support what the business most needs. Governance helps prevent that drift by making leaders ask whether a planned investment really supports enterprise objectives, whether expected benefits are clear, and whether the organization is willing to continue funding a program if the promised value never appears. For a CISA learner, this is a very important shift in thinking. You are not only asking whether a project was completed, you are asking whether the organization governed its technology choices in a way that supported its actual mission and strategy. Risk management sits close to the center of governance because leadership has to decide what kinds of technology risk are acceptable and what kinds require stronger control, escalation, or investment. An organization cannot eliminate all risk, and governance does not pretend otherwise. Instead, governance helps define risk appetite, set expectations for control, and make sure leaders receive timely information about major exposures involving security, resilience, third parties, legal requirements, data protection, or operational dependency. This is why governance of IT is not separate from cybersecurity, even though it operates at a higher level. If leadership does not understand the business significance of a ransomware event, a weak vendor contract, a fragile recovery process, or a concentration of privileged access, then technical teams may be left carrying strategic risk without enough authority or funding to address it well. From an audit perspective, this is a key area of attention because governance should show evidence that leadership knows what major technology risks exist, how those risks are being monitored, and whether the response is aligned with business priorities rather than driven only by recent panic or public headlines. Another core part of governance is resource optimization, which is a more practical idea than it may first appear. Every organization has limits on people, money, time, infrastructure, and management attention. That means leaders cannot fund every project, retain every aging system forever, or treat every request as equally urgent. Governance helps decide where scarce resources should go and what trade-offs the enterprise is willing to accept. A mature governance approach asks whether the most important systems have the people and budget they need, whether technical debt is being ignored for too long, whether key staff skills are strong enough for the current environment, and whether less important work is absorbing energy that should be directed elsewhere. This part of the domain matters because weak resource decisions often create problems that show up later as control failures, outages, burnout, delayed remediation, or over-reliance on vendors. When governance is strong, leadership is not simply approving spend. It is actively deciding how to direct limited resources toward the areas that produce the greatest business value and the most important risk reduction. Performance measurement is another major governance theme because leaders need a way to know whether their decisions are actually producing the results they intended. Without measurement, governance becomes little more than hope supported by meetings and opinion. Strong governance uses reporting, metrics, trend information, and management discussion to understand whether systems are available, projects are delivering expected benefits, controls are performing effectively, incidents are being handled responsibly, and investments are supporting business strategy. The important point for beginners is that performance measurement is not just about technical uptime or project completion percentages. Good governance looks at whether the organization is meeting service expectations, whether risk is increasing or decreasing, whether corrective actions are being completed, and whether business outcomes are improving in the areas where IT was supposed to help. This also means leaders need information that is timely, understandable, and connected to decision-making. A dashboard full of numbers may look impressive, but if those numbers do not help leadership judge performance, spot weakness, or change direction when needed, then the governance value is limited. An area that often surprises new learners is how much governance depends on culture, communication, and ethical behavior. Governance is not just formal charts and committee approvals. It also lives in whether people speak up when a control is weak, whether leaders listen when bad news travels upward, whether teams understand why a rule exists, and whether shortcuts are rewarded or challenged. A company may have beautiful policies on paper, but if managers routinely pressure staff to bypass review steps in order to meet deadlines, the real governance culture is telling a very different story. Tone from leadership matters because people notice quickly whether accountability is real or selective. Communication matters because risk information must travel clearly from operations to management and from management to oversight bodies without being buried, softened, or delayed. For an auditor, this part of governance can be harder to measure than a formal policy, but it is often where the truth becomes visible. Weak culture can quietly undermine strong structure, while a healthy culture can make governance more effective because people understand expectations and feel responsible for acting within them. Modern governance also has to extend beyond systems the organization owns directly, because much of today's IT environment depends on cloud services, software providers, outsourced operations, data processors, and other third parties. This means leadership cannot treat vendor decisions as separate from governance. If customer data lives in an external platform or if a key business process depends on a provider's availability, then that dependence has to be governed with the same seriousness as an internal system. Strong governance asks whether due diligence was performed, whether responsibilities are clear, whether performance is monitored, whether contracts support business needs, and whether contingency plans exist if the relationship fails or the service no longer meets expectations. This is a crucial beginner lesson because outsourcing a service does not outsource accountability. The organization still owns the business outcome, the risk exposure, and the reputational effect of any failure. Domain 2 matters here because it teaches you to see governance as enterprise-wide oversight, not merely a set of internal technology management habits limited to equipment sitting inside company walls. From an audit standpoint, Domain 2 teaches you to evaluate whether governance is actually happening in a structured and meaningful way rather than accepting the existence of committees or policies as proof by themselves. An auditor reviewing governance of IT will often look for evidence that roles are defined, decisions are made at the right level, strategy and IT plans are linked, major risks are reported upward, investments are evaluated for value, performance is monitored, and corrective actions are tracked when issues appear. The auditor also pays attention to whether governance structures are active or only ceremonial. A steering group that meets but never challenges failed projects, a risk report that no one reads closely, or a policy exception process that automatically approves every request may all signal governance weakness even when formal structures exist. One of the biggest misconceptions beginners have is assuming governance means bureaucracy for its own sake. In reality, the goal is not paperwork or more meetings. The goal is disciplined decision-making, visible accountability, and informed oversight that help the organization use IT in a way that supports mission, protects value, and manages risk responsibly. As we close, the most important thing to carry forward from this overview is that Domain 2 is really about leadership, accountability, and decision quality in the world of technology. Governance of IT helps the organization align technology with strategy, manage risk at the right level, use resources wisely, measure performance honestly, and make sure responsibility is clear when priorities compete or conditions change. It is broader than security, broader than project management, and broader than day-to-day operations because it asks whether the enterprise is steering its technology environment deliberately rather than simply reacting to pressure as it appears. For a CISA learner, that makes this domain extremely important. It gives you a lens for understanding why some organizations make strong technology decisions while others accumulate confusion, waste, and unmanaged exposure over time. When you study this domain, keep asking the same simple questions. Who decides? Who is accountable? What information reaches leadership? How does IT support the business? And how does the organization know whether governance is truly working? Those questions will help the whole domain stay clear as the material gets deeper.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.